You ever wish all of your soul food recipes were in one spot? Well, child, no need to worry because this is it. From crispy fried catfish to creamy mac and cheese, collard greens and apple pie, just like your grandma used to make. This is your one-stop shop for all things soul food. Whether you're feeding your family Sunday dinner or bringing a dish to the cookout, or you just want some down-home Southern cooking, I've pulled together all of my best soul food recipes in this one video. So let's get right into my best Southern soul food recipes from my kitchen to yours. I'm going to prepare the steak patties with 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, 2 tablespoons of ketchup, 1 teaspoon of Dijon mustard, and I'll also be adding 2 teaspoons of parsley. I'm also adding a half cup of breadcrumbs and 1 egg to bind everything together. Now I'm going to give it all a good mix, and then I'm going to form them into balls before shaping them into patties. I'm going to cook the steak patties in a couple of tablespoons of butter. I also added a tablespoon of olive oil. So I'm just going to cook these through on both sides. So now it's time to make the gravy. I'm adding a couple of tablespoons of butter to the juice that the meat cooked in to give it that extra flavor. I'm going to saute the onions first, and then I'm going to add the garlic and mushrooms later. You already know that once you add the garlic, things begin to move quickly because you don't want that garlic to burn. Once everything has finished sauteing, you want to add about 3 cups of beef broth and then give it a good stir. Next, we're going to add the pack of gravy mix. Now, this is going to level up your dish. Be sure to mix everything together. Now I'm adding about 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce, and then I'm going to add a teaspoon of Dijon mustard, 1 teaspoon of thyme, and then I'm going to give it a good stir. Next, I'm going to add flour to thicken it up, and I'm also tasting in between adding all of these ingredients. I just want to make sure I have enough salt and pepper. You want to add salt and pepper based on your taste buds. So now we just want to mix the gravy mix really well until the flour has disappeared. Once everything is well combined, you're going to add the beef steaks back to the gravy mix, and then spoon the gravy mix over the beef and then cover it for about 10 minutes on medium-low heat. This is how the Salisbury steak turned out, and these are the sides and dessert that I paired it with. Y'all, I know there are a lot of ingredients laid out for the ribs, but trust me when I say it's worth it. These are not the best cut ribs, y'all. I grabbed what I could get because they were on sale and the options were limited. So now I'm just removing the membrane. I didn't even know this was a thing, y'all, but thankfully I did my research before making these. Now, the purpose of removing the membrane is so that the meat is not all tough and chewy. The membrane doesn't break down during the cooking process, so that is what leads to the chewiness. Removing it is not mandatory, and you can totally leave it on and cook it on there, but just know that the texture of your meat is going to be a little bit different. Now that I've tenderized the meat with a fork, I'm just adding some mustard Yeah, that. The mustard acts as a binder. It helps the seasoning stick to the meat. You won't taste it at all once it's finished cooking. Something else you could use instead of mustard is apple cider vinegar, beef broth, Worcestershire sauce, barbecue sauce. Either of these will make the spices stick to the meat. And because I'm not cooking these ribs on a grill, I'm adding liquid smoke. That's going to give it that smoky flavor to make it taste like I cooked these on a grill. For the spices, I used 1 tablespoon of onion powder, 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, 1 tablespoon of smoked paprika, 1 tablespoon of seasoned salt, 1 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, and 1 tablespoon of ground black pepper. And what I did was I combined all of the spices together in a bowl, so all I had to do was just sprinkle it onto the ribs. So now I just turned the meat over and I'm following the same process as I did on the front side. The only difference is this time I started with the liquid smoke first. I don't think there's a right or wrong way. You can do liquid smoke first, then the mustard. Either way will work. But this time I added the liquid smoke. I rubbed it into the meat. Then I added the mustard. And then now I'm just adding the spices. Notice that I'm not rubbing the spices into the meat. I'm just lightly patting it, because if you rub it, it's going to come off and you don't want your spices to come off of the meat. And now I'm just going to let the meat sit for about 15 minutes so that all of the spices can absorb into the meat. And this is what my meat looks like after cooking it in the oven for 2 hours at 275 degrees. Now for that last hour, what I'm going to do is cook my ribs in a foil packet. And on the foil packet, I'm just adding some brown sugar. There's no specific measurements. I'm just adding brown sugar, and then I'm going to add a stick of butter. And then I'm going to place the meat on top of the butter and brown sugar. And then I'm going to add some A&W root beer, y'all. You are not going to taste the root beer during the cooking process. This is only to steam the meat. It's just going to level up that brown sugar and butter flavor. I'm going to place these back in the oven at 350 degrees for 1 hour. This is how my ribs turned out, and these are all of the sides and dessert that I paired it with. In this small bowl, I have a half teaspoon of smoked paprika, a half teaspoon of black pepper, a half teaspoon of garlic powder, a half teaspoon of salt, and a half teaspoon of onion powder. Now in a larger bowl, I'm going to pour 1 cup of flour and a half cup of cornstarch, and then I'm going to add all of my seasonings. And now I'm just going to mix everything together. I was supposed to season my chicken, y'all, before I dipped them in the flour mixture, but I forgot. So I'm going to have to add all of my salt and pepper after they come out of the grease, because I do want my chicken to be flavorful. Now that the oil is up to temp, I'm going to fry a few at a time. I don't want to overcrowd the pot because I don't want them sticking together while they're cooking. This is how they look fresh out of the oil. Look at that deliciousness, y'all. For the lemon pepper wings, I used 3/4 cups of butter, 1 tablespoon of lemon pepper seasoning, and 1 teaspoon of black pepper. I'm going to place these in a small bowl, drizzle the butter mixture over it, and give it a good shake. And this is what the lemon pepper wings look like. I'm just going to repeat the same process for the honey barbecue wings. I'm just spreading barbecue sauce into the bowl on top of the wings, and then I'm going to give it a good shake. And this is what the honey barbecue wings are looking like. These are all of the sides and dessert that I paired the wings with. What we've all been waiting for, jambalaya. I'm going to start by seasoning my shrimp with Cajun seasoning. I use Slap Your Mama. I also have the Tony's, but you can use whatever seasoning you like. I'm lightly coating the shrimp and giving it a good mix to make sure each one has a little season on it. Cajun season tends to be a little bit on the salty side, so you may want to go easy. While I was seasoning my shrimp, I had my olive oil heating up on the stove, and so now I'm just cooking my shrimp in the olive oil. I'm not cooking it all the way because y'all know shrimp tends to cook really fast and you don't want to do that when you're making jambalaya. Now I'm just adding my chopped sausage to new olive oil. I didn't want to use the olive oil that I cooked the shrimp in because I didn't want my meat to have that shrimp flavor, even though it's going to all be mixed together eventually. I just cleaned the pot, got some new oil, and I cooked my sausage in that. Now I'm just adding my bell pepper and onion to the same oil that I cooked the sausage in, just to give it that added flavor. So now I'm just giving it a good mix, and I used my handheld chopper to chop it up. That's why they look perfectly cubed. So yeah, I'm just giving it a good stir. I don't like crunchy jambalaya, so that's why I'm going to cook these vegetables down until they are soft. Now I'm going to add some garlic. I added garlic last because I do not want my garlic to burn, because I would have to start all of these vegetables over, and I don't have any more bell peppers, so I couldn't do that. Once I get my vegetables cooked down to the way I want it, I added the sausage and chicken back to the pot. Notice I didn't add the shrimp, and the reason why I didn't add the shrimp because it does cook fast and you do not want gummy shrimp in your jambalaya. I've added 1 can of tomato sauce. I ended up using 2 whole cans because of how much jambalaya I cooked. I underestimated myself, so I ended up using 2 cans of tomato sauce and a can of those diced tomatoes. I also used a teaspoon of thyme, a teaspoon of oregano, a teaspoon of Creole seasoning, and a little pepper. I'm also using a little salt, but not too much because, like I said, Creole seasoning is very salty. And I'm mixing everything up. I kind of sort of cooked the rice in a rice cooker. I didn't let it cook all the way because I don't want my rice to be gummy. And that's because the jambalaya is going to cook for a good 30 minutes. So I just cooked it enough so that it is not crunchy. The last time I tried to cook rice in my jambalaya, it was a little crunchy because I didn't pre-cook it. So I pre-cooked it a little bit and then added it to the pot and then let it cook for 30 minutes. In the last 10 minutes of me cooking this jambalaya, I added my shrimp. That way it can cook all the way through and it won't be gummy. I also added 3 bay leaves to the pot to give it that added flavor. This is how my jambalaya turned out, and these are all of the sides and 2 desserts that I paired with it. The first thing I'm going to do is wash this chicken with lime juice and limes. This removes all of that slime and it helps to tenderize the meat. If you have ever bought chicken and it had a chemical-like aftertaste, the lime gets rid of that. I actually stopped buying chicken at Kroger and Albertsons for that reason. It always had that chemical-like aftertaste. I don't know what steroids taste like, but if I had to guess, that's probably what the aftertaste is. Y'all, look at how clouded that water is. The lime is doing its job. You can best believe this chicken came to the right spa today. Her skin is getting exfoliated. So now I'm just rinsing off all of the lime juice. Now it's time to give this chicken some flavor. For the spices, I'm using 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, 1/2 tablespoon of adobo seasoning, 1 tablespoon of Creole seasoning, a 1/2 tablespoon of paprika, 1 tablespoon of onion powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of black pepper. I'm going to drizzle a little olive oil onto the skin to make the spices stick. And then I'm going to mix all of my spices together. Okay, so mistake number 1 was I didn't rub the oil into the skin of the chicken, which means the spices are going to slide right off the part that I didn't get oil on. Once I realized my mistake, I rubbed the oil and spices together on the skin. Now, would this make a difference? Yes, indeed, because I could not get the spices to stick like I wanted it to. And the main reason was the oil. I did not put enough oil on this chicken and I did not rub it into the chicken. So don't do like I did. If you want your spice to stick to your chicken, rub oil all over that thing. You can see the parts that's missing spices, and that's also where the oil is missing too. But in the words of Bob Ross, it's a happy little mistake. Can it be corrected? Yes. So now I'm just rubbing all of my spices inside of the chicken. Now for this part, I was supposed to stuff the can with fresh rosemary and thyme. I don't have either of those. I mean, I do have some sprouting outside in the ground, but not enough to do what I needed to do. Did y'all peep the top of that chicken? It looks like it has bland-like tendencies, but trust and believe, I'm going to fix it. See, I fixed it. It doesn't look as bland as it did going into the oven. I'm adding a little butter, and then I'm going to pop this back into the oven for about 20 more minutes. This is how the beer can chicken turned out. It is nice, juicy, and flavorful. And these are the sides and dessert that I paired it with. I'm starting with the baked catfish first, and the spices that I'll be using are 1 teaspoon of dried parsley, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, 1 teaspoon of Creole seasoning, 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika, and then I'm going to add salt and pepper to taste. Before I prepare my fish, I'm going to slice up these lemons, and the purpose of the lemons is to stop the fish from sticking to the bottom of the pan. I don't know if y'all ever cooked baked fish, but whenever you bake fish, it always some kind of way gets stuck to the bottom of the pan. But if you use lemons, it will prevent all of that from happening. Next, I'm going to take some butter. I usually use like olive oil or something, but I'm just using butter today. And the purpose of the butter is to make sure that the seasonings stick to the fish. I've already mixed all of my seasonings together, and I'm just applying a generous amount to both sides of the fish. And on the back side, I'm just going to follow the same process. I'm going to add the butter and then the seasonings. And y'all, this is going to be so flavorful and delicious. Now, if you're wondering why I'm doing baked fish, it's because I'm trying to do better about what I eat. I know I'm going to fry some fish. I might even sample a piece of the fried fish, but for the most part, the baked fish is for me, and I'm just going to add vegetables to my plate. So now I'm just placing the fish onto the lemon wedges, and I'm going to stick it in the oven for 20 minutes. All right, let's bake some good old southern fried catfish. I'm adding mustard and 1 egg to my freshly washed and dried fish. The purpose of using mustard is to help the breading stick, and it also makes the fish tender and juicy on the inside. I'm just seasoning up my fish with hot sauce, salt, pepper, and Creole seasoning before I add it to the breading. Y'all, I did not feel like digging for gloves, so I just used my hands, and yes, it was quite messy, but I got everything mixed together, and this is what the fish should look like before you add it into the breading. And for the breading, I'm using Louisiana fish fry because I am a Louisiana girl, and I'm going to add flour to the fish fry. There's no specific measurements, I just eyeballed it, and this is what it looked like after I mixed everything together. And now I'm just going to add my fish to the breading, and then I'm going to place it into the grease, which is already heating up on the stove. This is how the fish turned out, and these are all of the sides and dessert that I paired it with. Here are the spices that I'm using for the smothered chicken. 1 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1 tablespoon of onion powder, 1 tablespoon of chicken bouillon, and 1 teaspoon of paprika. My chicken has been washed and dried, and now I'm going to drizzle a little olive oil on it and give it a good rub. The reason why we add oil before spices is so that the spices will stick to the chicken. Y'all, smothered chicken was a weekly meal in my house growing up. My parents would make it with mashed potatoes and sweet peas. My mom would take the juices from the chicken and make an indentation in the mashed potatoes and then fill it with the juice or gravy made from the chicken. It was so good, y'all. But I'm making mine slightly different than the way they made theirs. I remember them using cream of chicken and cream of mushroom in addition to a few spices. I'm not using the cream of chicken and cream of mushroom. I will be making a roux, so that will kind of sort of take the place of the cream of chicken and cream of mushroom. So right now I'm just pouring the spices a little at a time to make sure that all of the legs are covered. Right now it doesn't look well seasoned, but once I get all of the spices on there, you will be able to see the difference. I have my oil heating up so that I can sear the chicken legs. I'm using vegetable oil, but you can pretty much use whatever oil you have on hand. I'm searing the legs on all sides, and the purpose of searing is to create that golden brown crust. It's more for texture, but it also enhances the flavor of the chicken. So just imagine all of those spices that we added to the chicken. This is going to be chef's kiss, y'all. So now I'm just going to saute my bell pepper, onion, and garlic in some butter. If I had celery, this is where I would have added it, but since I don't, I'm just going to roll with what I have. I'm going to cook these until they are softened or translucent. And it may take a minute because the bell pepper was frozen. By this point, I've added 4 tablespoons of flour, and I'm just stirring to get that raw flour taste out. It kind of sort of looks like a roux. So now I'm just going to add chicken stock to loosen up the flour mixture. This is the consistency that I want. You can see the chunks of bell pepper while the onion and garlic has blended in. When it comes to vegetables, you can slice them, dice them, chop them, however you like them. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So now I'm pouring the mixture onto the chicken, and then I'm going to place it into the oven at 375 degrees for 1 hour. But I am going to cover it before I place it into the oven. And this is how my smothered chicken turned out. To make the herb butter pork chops, we'll need 1 tablespoon of Creole seasoning, 1 tablespoon of Italian seasoning, 1 tablespoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of thyme, 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, and 1 teaspoon of oregano. I'm stirring all of my seasonings together so that when I'm ready, I can just sprinkle it onto my pork chops. I took a lime earlier with some water and washed my pork chops. If y'all had seen all of the grease that came out of that water, I mean, it was so nasty, but they are nice and clean now. I'm using a meat tenderizer to poke little holes. That way my pork chops are not chewy and tough. They will be melt in your mouth tender. So now I'm just sprinkling my seasonings onto the pork chops. So I have one hand that I'm using for the meat and the other hand is for the spices, just so that I don't cross contaminate. Whenever I'm dealing with meat, I stay washing my hands or switching out gloves. I go through so many pairs of gloves when I'm cooking. It's ridiculous but necessary. Instead of rubbing the seasonings into the meat, I'm just patting. I learned that rubbing kind of takes the seasonings off and we want them to stay, so that's why I'm patting them. Also, since I poked little holes in the meat, the seasonings will fall in there, giving it that added flavor with each bite. So now I'm just going through and adding a little smoked paprika and some salt. The paprika is really to give it that added color and a little smoky flavor. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the back of the pork chops. I want to make sure that I season both sides of this meat. So pretty much I'm just repeating the same process that I followed with the other side of the meat. Again, we want this meat to be nice and tender, not chewy and tough. Pork chops are well seasoned. I'm going to melt some butter in my skillet. I'm just using regular Kerrygold butter. I'm going to place my pork chops right on top of that butter, and then I'm going to let them cook until it's nice and golden brown. This is how my herbed butter pork chops turned out, and these are the sides and dessert that I paired it with. Next up is oven fried chicken. Now, whenever I make chicken, I like to let it marinate. So here I'm whisking 2 eggs, and then I'm going to add buttermilk. The buttermilk will make the chicken nice and juicy, while the eggs will allow the coating to stick to the chicken. Normally, I'll add the eggs to the buttermilk, but I found that it's easier to just whisk them first and then add the buttermilk. Next, I'm going to add some hot sauce. Now, this is up to your personal preference. I added about a 1/4 cup of hot sauce. You can add a cup. Whatever level of spiciness you like, you can go ahead and add that much hot sauce. We don't do spicy here, so I'm just adding a tiny bit, just enough to give it flavor. The chicken has been nice and washed, and now I'm going to cover it and place it in the fridge for about 4 hours. After 4 hours, I rinsed the buttermilk mixture off and dried the chicken because I'm using this great value extra crispy oven fry mix, and the more wet your chicken is, the less it will stick to it. Now, one thing I forgot to add to the marinade was kosher salt, but you know what? That's okay. The chicken will still be nice and moist on the inside and extra crispy on the outside. So now I've poured the shake and bake mixture into the bag, and I'm coating the chicken. I only had 1 box in my pantry, and I really needed 2, y'all. I'm going to figure out how to make it work with 1 box. 2 boxes would have given me the chance to coat the chicken twice, making it even more crispy. But I'm just gonna make it do what it do with this 1 box. The first few pieces are going to be nice and coated, but as I do more, you'll see less and less of the oven fry mixture, and this is with using both packets that came with the box. Y'all, I really do need to invest in an air fryer. I'm sure these will be nice and crispy, and the cooking time will be way less in an air fryer. If you have one, let me know down in the comment section which brand do you like, because I like to research before I buy anything, and I need to see which air fryer will work best for all the things that I cook. These have been cooking at 400 degrees for 30 minutes. I'm going to drizzle some butter on them. Sometimes I add honey to the butter, but I skipped that this time around. I'm just using regular old butter. And then I'm going to pop these back in the oven for another 30 minutes so that they can get nice and crispy. This is how the crispy oven fried chicken turned out, and these are all of the sides and the dessert that I made to go along with it.
Love, I never knew until the day that I met you. Colors were gray, melody sung, sounded the same. The sun, stars, and moon, all feeling brighter, breath feeling new. Do what you do. You took my days, filled them with life. Now I can say
I'm drizzling a little olive oil onto my freshly washed chicken so that my spices will stick to it. And then I'm going to rub it to make sure that both sides are well coated with the oil. For my seasonings, I'll be using 1 teaspoon of parsley, 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika, a half teaspoon of red pepper flakes, 1 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, 1 teaspoon of Cajun seasoning, and a half teaspoon of lemon pepper. And here are the rest of the ingredients. I'll also be using a half cup of Parmesan cheese, 4 ounces of sun-dried tomatoes, a half teaspoon of salt and pepper, 1 tablespoon of chicken bouillon. The recipe calls for chicken bouillon base, but since I didn't have any, I'm just using the powdered version. I'm also using 1 small chopped onion, 2 cloves of garlic, a half cup of chicken broth, 1 cup of heavy whipping cream, and a half cup of flour. When I first saw this recipe, I was a little intimidated because it is a lot of ingredients. But once I got organized and measured everything out, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. So the key here is to pre-measure all of your ingredients and separate them into individual containers. That way you can just go step by step by step and you don't miss a step and everything runs smoothly that way. I'm blending all of my seasonings together and then adding it to the chicken. You want to be very generous so that the chicken is seasoned to perfection. Now I'm just going in under the skin and adding more seasoning. Trust and believe this chicken is going to be so flavorful and juicy. Now I don't like to rub spices all over my chicken because I found that it removes most of it. Instead, I'll give it a good pat. I flipped all of my chicken thighs over and now I'm just seasoning the other side. Let's heat up the oil so that we can sear the chicken. I'm using olive oil. You can use whatever oil you have on hand. And while the oil is heating up, I'm going to go ahead and dip the thighs into the flour. You want to make sure that you shake off any excess flour before you sear it. Let's place these into the heated oil, making sure that we don't overcrowd the skillet. I'm cooking 6 thighs all together, but I can only do 4 at a time due to the size of the skillet. When searing, you want to brown your meat on both sides versus cooking it all the way through because these do have to go in the oven. Now I'm taking about 2 tablespoons of butter using the same juices that I seared the meat in, and then I'm going to saute my onions until they're translucent. Y'all, I just had a thought. I could have used the oil from the sun-dried tomatoes versus olive oil to sear my meat. That would have given this added flavor. You know, I'll know the next time I try this, but this is my first time using sun-dried tomatoes. I didn't even know they came in oil. So next time I will be searing my meat in the oil. I added my garlic last because it doesn't take long for it to cook and I didn't want it to burn. So I'm just incorporating all of the vegetables together. I've added the sun-dried tomatoes and I've just added the heavy whipping cream. And I'm giving everything a good stir. Next, I'm going to add in the chicken stock. I'm just going through and adding all of the seasonings that I put on my chicken. Silly me, I didn't set any aside for the sauce. I put it all on the chicken. So now I'm just going through and adding everything that I mixed together in the seasoning bowl. I'm also adding my salt and pepper and the chicken bouillon seasoning. Now for this part, I'm not using the same measurements that I used for the chicken. I'm seasoning to taste. Like I'm sprinkling seasonings and I'm tasting in between to make sure it's to my liking. I've placed all of my chicken thighs into a casserole dish and now I'm just going to pour that sauce all over it, y'all. Look how yummy and delicious that looks. So now I'm just taking a spoon and I'm spooning the sauce over the meat. I want to cover each individual piece. These will go in the oven at 375 degrees for about 25 to 30 minutes. And this is what they look like fresh out of the oven, y'all.
Will you marry me?
Yes, I will marry you.
Oh, this is awkward. I was talking about the chicken.
Next on the menu is red beans and rice. And I'm going to start with the rice first. I'm using chicken stock instead of water to give it that extra flavor. And as far as measurements go, I'm following what's on the back of the rice bag, using 1 cup of rice and 2 cups of chicken stock. Now on to the red beans. The ingredients that I'm using are 1 teaspoon of thyme, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika, 1 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, a half teaspoon of black pepper, and a half teaspoon of salt. So now I'm just melting the butter so that I can go ahead and saute my vegetables. I'm going to start with the bell pepper first because it is frozen. I'm adding my onions now that the bell pepper has cooked down, and I'm just going to saute both of those together. Now at this point I was supposed to add garlic, but as you can see I did forget. That's okay. And now I'm going to add my chopped sausage, and I'm going to mix everything together. The sausage is going to release its flavor into the vegetables, so it's going to have that nice meaty flavor. And then I'm going to pop open my cans of red beans and rice and mix everything together. This is me cutting corners again by using these cans of red beans. Now I did not have time to soak my actual red beans overnight, so I went ahead and popped open these cans since I had them in the pantry anyway. And now I'm just going to add all of the seasonings to my beans and meat and everything, all the vegetables, and I'm going to mix everything together. Last but not least, I'm going to add 2 bay leaves to give it that subtle hint of flavor. For the garlic butter mashed potatoes, I'm going to start with heating up the chicken stock. This is definitely not enough to cover the amount of potatoes that I'm cooking. I just wanted to give it a head start so that it would be nice and hot by the time I do add the potatoes. I've washed and peeled all of the potatoes, and now I'm going to chop them up. I do have a bowl full of cold water to place them in after they've been chopped. The cold water will help to keep them from turning brown. Similar thought process as the lemon juice and apples. When I chop the potatoes, I slice them in half first, and then slice that half in half, and then cut it sideways. Now that all of the potatoes have been chopped, I'm going to add them to the chicken stock. Once I get them all in the pot, I'll know how much additional water to add. I've also added 1.5 teaspoon of chicken bouillon. You have to be very careful when adding that because it is very salty. You add a little at a time until you get it to your desired taste. Now I'm going to cook these until they are tender. While the potatoes are cooking, I'm going to prepare the garlic butter sauce to pour into the potatoes, but first I'm going to melt the butter. While the butter is melting, I'm going to mash the potatoes with my potato masher. If you want to save time in the kitchen, multitasking is your best friend. I'm always thinking about what can I do while this is warming up or marinating or cooking. So now that my butter is melted, I'm going to add my chopped garlic. I've sauteed about 3 cloves. If you like the garlicky taste, you can add more, or if you don't like it at all, you can skip the garlic altogether and just melt the butter, add salt and some heavy whipping cream. I'm adding about a half cup of heavy whipping cream to the garlic butter sauce, and then whatever I have left over, I'm going to add it to the mashed potatoes. Not all of it, just some of it, until I get it to my desired consistency. Now that the sauce is ready, I'm going to go ahead and pour it into the mashed potatoes. Y'all check this out. My husband and I are really cutting up in this kitchen.
Alexa, play LA Devotee in the family room.
LA Devotee by Panic at the Disco.
About the balls in the
Amazon Music.
sweaty
The
balls.
whole car like sweaty balls that are dead inside. We're like, what?
I'm like, how is he letting these kids listen to this stuff?
They're talking about swimming.
And here are the garlic mashed potatoes. Let's cook some mac and cheese, y'all. Right now I'm multitasking by shredding my sharp cheddar while letting the water come to a boil for the pasta. This is a great way to allow the cheese to soften so that it will easily melt when you combine all of the ingredients together. So now that my water has come to a boil, I've added salt. The purpose of adding salt is to give the pasta more flavor because it absorbs that salt when it's cooking. I've added some butter and I'm going to give it a good stir so that the butter can melt. Next, I'm adding white pepper. I know I had black pepper in the ingredients list at the beginning, but I switched to white pepper thinking that I wouldn't see the black pepper specks in the macaroni. I totally forgot about the Creole seasoning because you will see all of the little specks with the Creole seasoning. So moral of the story, it doesn't matter which one you use. It's all going to taste delicious. So now I'm just adding the sharp cheddar cheese to my pasta. This is the cheese that I shredded earlier. I'm also going to be using Kobe Jack cheese in a bag because that shredded cheese is just not enough for this macaroni. I have some room temperature half and half that I'm pouring in here. Right now I'm starting with 2 cups and then I'm going to add an additional cup because if your macaroni and cheese go in dry, it's going to come out dry. So I want my macaroni and cheese to be as wet as possible. So that's why I add so much half and half. Now that I have my mac and cheese the way I want it, I'm going to pour the egg in. Remember to taste your macaroni and cheese before putting that egg in there because once that egg goes in there, there's no more tasting. So now I'm just going to pour my mac and cheese into a dish and then I'm going to bake it at 350 degrees for 35 minutes. But before I put it in the oven, I'm going to sprinkle more cheese on there. Y'all, I miss my smoked Gouda cheese. I didn't have any smoked Gouda cheese this week, so I'm just using sharp cheddar and Kobe Jack, but it's still going to taste good. And the final thing that I'm going to do before it goes into the oven is sprinkle some paprika on it. And the paprika gives it that color. Green beans are pretty easy to cook, especially coming from a can. I always use some type of meat, and today I'm using a ham shank. I didn't have enough chicken stock, so I'm adding chicken bouillon to give it a little flavor. I always use some type of stock or bouillon to level up my dishes. I'm going to give it a good stir and then let it simmer for an hour or until the meat falls off the bone. Once the meat falls off the bone, I'm going to take it out of the pot and then chop it up and then return it back to the pot with the green beans. I did drain the beans before adding them to the juice that I cooked the ham shank in. I didn't show this part, but I did add 1 packet of onion soup mix to the ham shank so that it can give it more flavor. And I'm just going to let this cook for another 10 minutes or so. I also added salt, pepper, and red pepper flakes to taste. And this is how the green beans turned out. The Red Lobster cheddar biscuits were pretty easy to make. I just followed the instructions on the back of the box. Yeah, my husband loves these biscuits. I remember when he first introduced me to them, I was all excited because he hyped them up so much. But to me, they were just okay. I wasn't too crazy about them. But I cooked them for him, and it also pairs well with the jambalaya. You can also do garlic bread, garlic knots, garlic toast. Either of those would go well with jambalaya. I could have made them a little bigger, but since we had company, I opted to go smaller to make more. That way, if anyone wanted seconds, they could have them. So now I'm just using the butter herb mix and sprinkling the butter all over the cheddar biscuits. And as you can see, we had those Red Lobster cheddar biscuits with jambalaya. Let's make some candied yams, y'all. I've made this a few times before, but each time tastes different than the last. I like to slice my sweet potatoes because that's how I was taught to do it. How do you all do yours? Do you dice them? Do you slice them? I'm curious to see other ways to cut these up. Y'all, I'm not gonna lie. Whenever I'm chopping anything with a knife, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, don't chop your finger off. I'm not sure what's been going on lately, but I've been cutting my fingers up. Not cooking, but just on random things like cardboard boxes and paper. Like, what is really going on? So now I'm just going to add my salt, cinnamon, nutmeg, sugars, vanilla extract, butter, and then I'm going to squeeze some orange juice into my sweet potatoes. I'm loosely following a recipe, but not really, because whenever I make candied yams, I add things to taste. I started with a half cup of granulated sugar and a half cup of brown sugar, but if that's not enough, I'll go back and add more. I also started with a teaspoon of cinnamon and a half teaspoon of nutmeg, but if that's not enough, I'll add more. The ginger and cloves both have strong flavors, so I only added a quarter teaspoon of each. And then I finished it off with a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Now I'm going to squeeze juice from half of this orange into the candied yams. This just adds a little tang to it. Now my dad would be having all kinds of fits if he knew that I was squeezing orange or lemon juice into candied yams. He says that it ruins the taste, but I agree to disagree. And here are the finished candied yams. Y'all, this recipe is pretty straightforward because I'm following the instructions on the box. The only difference is I'm using chicken stock instead of water because water just makes it plain and boring while chicken stock livens it up. These are the spices that I will be putting in the collard greens. We have a teaspoon of chicken bouillon, a half teaspoon of black pepper, a half teaspoon of salt, and a half teaspoon of red pepper flakes. These are not the measurements that I typically use when I make fresh collard greens, but since these are frozen, I'm starting with smaller measurements and then I will adjust as I go, which means that I will have to taste it to see what more I need to add. I'm sauteing my bell pepper and onion. I started with the bell pepper first because it was frozen. Off camera, I poured 2 cups of the chicken stock that the ham shank cooked in into a measuring cup because the instructions on the back of the frozen collard green package said to use 1 cup of water per bag. Since I'm using 2 frozen bags of collard greens, I'm doubling the measurements. I'm going to let this cook down before adding all of my seasonings. You know, sometimes you just have to cut corners to save time in the kitchen, and my way of cutting a corner was to use a frozen bag of collard greens. So now I've chopped up my ham shank and I'm just putting everything in the pot with the collard greens. So 2 things that I forgot to film me adding, and that was sugar and apple cider vinegar, and I added both of those to taste. I've added the onion soup mix and then I'm going to give everything a good stir before I let it simmer. This is how the collard greens turned out. It was a side dish to the fried catfish. The first thing that I'm going to do is pick through the peas and get rid of any that look sus. Now, sometimes you may find rocks, so it's better to take your time and go through all of the peas. Yeah, the ones that look like this should not be in there. Someone did leave a great tip in the comment section the other day regarding picking through beans and peas. They said it's quicker to place them on a sheet pan, and I totally agree. I tried it last week and I was able to see all of the beans that didn't belong. I would have used a sheet pan today, but I'm not sure what my other 2 kids were cooking, but they were all in one use. Now that I have went through and gotten rid of all of the peas that don't belong, I'm just going to give them a good wash. I didn't soak them overnight, so I'm going to flash soak them. And to do that, I'm going to place my washed peas into a pot of boiling water for 2 minutes. And then after 2 minutes, I'm going to remove them from the heat and then cover and let them sit for 1 hour. You can totally skip this step because the peas are small enough to where they will still cook evenly. Soaking just helps them to cook faster and reduce the amount of gas buildup in your stomach. I've added my liner to the crock pot because who has time to do all of that cleaning afterwards? This is how the peas look after soaking for 1 hour. Notice that they are slightly larger than they were before flash soaking them. Let's pour them into the crock pot so that they can start cooking. Y'all, this smoked turkey leg is so huge. I couldn't get it to fit in that crock pot or any pot for that matter. I tested a few out, but it just would not fit in any of my pots. So I'll have to cut the meat off the bone and let it cook that way. I mean, I was going to have to cut it up anyway after a few hours, so I might as well do it now. I figured that by cutting it up, the black eyed peas will have even more of that smoky flavor. Let me know in the comments section, what type of meat do you use when cooking black eyed peas? My go-to meat is smoked neck bones, but I'm slowly moving away from that because of all of the bones that it leaves behind when you cook it. I tried ham shanks for the first time and I loved it. There are no extra bones, just meat. I figured I would give this turkey leg a try, but didn't realize how big it was when I grabbed it. I should have paid attention to that. But we're going to give this turkey leg a try and see what these black eyed peas are going to taste like with it. So now I'm just adding a carton of chicken stock. I know that this will not be enough to cover all of the peas and meat, so I'm going to add a little water to get everything all covered up. I have my onion all nice and chopped. I use my food processor instead of chopping it myself to save time. Then I'm going to add my bell pepper. I have a few packs stashed away in the freezer, so I just grabbed one to add here. I really needed to add celery, but I didn't have any pre-made frozen packs or any fresh celery in the fridge, so we'll just have to skip that ingredient for now. I have about 4 cloves of garlic that I'm pressing into the crock pot, and when all of these vegetables marry, it's going to have the whole house smelling like the good old days, y'all. And last but not least, I'll be adding 2 bay leaves. Notice that I haven't added any seasonings yet. I'm going to save that for the last hour of cooking. When you add salt at the beginning, it causes your peas to toughen, but if you add it towards the end, it allows the peas to fully cook and they will have a more tender texture. It's really all about personal preference. Since I discovered adding salt towards the end, that's how I've been cooking mine. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to touch it. I'm just going to let it cook for 5 hours. But in that 4th hour is when I'm going to come in and add my seasonings. The seasonings that I'm using are 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, a half teaspoon of Creole seasoning, a half teaspoon of smoked paprika, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 1/4 teaspoon of chicken bouillon powder, and 1 teaspoon of oregano. So now I'm just going to mix all of these spices together before adding them to the pot. When I tell you that my kitchen smells like that good old after church, let's eat type of smell, it's that smoked turkey leg combined with the onions, garlic, and bell pepper that has my kitchen smelling so good. My middle son walked in and said that it smells just like Mama and Papa's house. And it does. It really does. That's why I have to keep these types of meals going so that we don't forget our ancestors. So now I'm just stirring and sampling to see how much salt needs to be added. The Creole seasoning is salty, but after tasting the pot liquor, it could use a tiny bit more. Once I get the taste where I want it, then I'm going to cover it and let it cook for 1 more hour. And this is how the black eyed peas turned out. For the jasmine rice, I'm pretty much following the instructions on the back of the package, and I'm using my good old trusty rice cooker because that's the only way I know how to cook rice. I normally use chicken stock when I'm making rice, but this time I'm using water. Since Since I'm making herb butter pork chops, I figured that roasted red potatoes would pair well with that. I've washed my potatoes in cold water and now I'm slicing them into small to medium sized pieces. The smaller they are, the quicker they will cook. I chose red potatoes for several reasons, but the number one reason why I bought red potatoes is because a 5-pound bag was on sale at Joe V's for $2. There is so much that I can do with a 5-pound bag of potatoes, y'all. But the other reason why I bought red potatoes is because it's a good source of potassium, fiber, vitamin C, and B6. I'm always looking for more ways to get that fiber in. Now I'm adding seasoned salt, herbs, and black pepper. There are no specific measurements because I'm adding to taste. I did drizzle olive oil onto the potatoes before adding any of my seasonings, and the purpose for adding the oil is to help the seasoning stick to the potatoes. Now, I didn't want to go overboard with the seasoned salt because I can always add that once they're finished cooking. I always tell myself that it's easier to add than take away, so I try to go easy when sprinkling my spices. So now I'm giving everything a good mix, making sure that all of the spices are incorporated. I used dried thyme, rosemary, basil, and parsley. You can also make this process even easier by simply using Italian seasoning as a substitute for all of those herbs. I've added some Kerrygold butter to my skillet, and now I'm lightly cooking the potatoes just to give them a head start before I place them in the oven. Y'all, I wish that smell-o-vision was a thing because it smells so good in my kitchen. This is how my potatoes are looking before I place them in a 13x9 baking dish. I'm going to place them in the oven at 400 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes. This is how the red potatoes turned out, and I served it with the herb butter pork chops. Next up is asparagus, another vegetable that I have not cooked in a really long time. I had my middle son with me when I went grocery shopping the other day, and he picked out okra and asparagus, y'all. He also likes Brussels sprouts, but I have not found a recipe for that, at least one that I can throw together for him. But if any of you know of a good Brussels sprout recipe, let me know down in the comments section, because he asked for Brussels sprouts, but I was like, let's just start with asparagus and this okra, and then we'll work on Brussels sprouts later. So now I'm cooking the asparagus in some Kerrygold garlic butter. I want these to be nice and tender before I add any salt and pepper. Next, I'm going to pour a little low sodium soy sauce because we all know how salty regular soy sauce is. So I'm just doing this to give it that added flavor. You know, this is something that we would normally not eat on a soul food Sunday. I'm more of a candied yams, mac and cheese, collard greens type of soul food Sunday eater, but you know, it's okay to venture out and try new things. And that's what we're doing today. We are trying new vegetables. I've added a little pepper and gave it a good stir, and now I'm adding salt. I've already tasted one to make sure that the flavor was there, and it was. So I'm just going to take these out of the skillet because we don't want to burn our asparagus, and we also do not want soggy asparagus. Here's the asparagus all finished, and it was also another side dish to the herb butter pork chops. First up is this homemade apple pie. To start, I'm peeling 6 Granny Smith apples, and the reason why I use Granny Smith apples is because they don't get mushy while they're baking, and plus the tart flavor pairs well with the sweetness of the pie filling. Other apples will turn to mush, leaving you with an applesauce pie, but Granny Smith apples will hold its shape during the baking process. Now I'm just removing the skin from the apples. This is how my dad taught me how to do it. You take your knife and cut into a circle until you get to the bottom of the apple. As far as slicing them, I cut them in half first to make sure that I don't include apple seeds in my pie. But once I slice it in half, I cut around the core and then slice them into the shape that I want them to look when I bake the pie. Once I slice them, I just add them to this bowl that I have set aside, and then I'm going to squeeze the juice of 1 lemon. Lemon slows down the oxidation process, which means that it stops the apples from turning brown while I prepare the remaining ingredients. Now, I probably should have just cut the lemon in half instead of multiple parts because I would have gotten more juice that way. I don't know what I was thinking. Now I have to hand squeeze, which is what I was trying to avoid in order to get the most juice out of this lemon. If you are concerned that your pie will taste lemony, I can assure you that it won't. You will not taste any lemons in this pie. I've chopped a half cup of butter. It melts faster when you chop it versus placing the whole stick in the pan. To the butter, I'm adding 3/4 cup of brown sugar and 3/4 cup of granulated sugar. And then I'm going to whisk everything together until it's well blended. Here I have 2 teaspoons of cinnamon and 1/4 teaspoon of allspice. I'm going to add this to the sugar and butter mixture and give it a good stir. Next, I have 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract that I'm going to mix into the pie filling. Now, here is a trick that I learned from watching all of those baking shows on TLC. I'm pouring half of the pie filling into a measuring cup, but it's better to use a bowl because you'll have more space to mix. To the cup, I'm adding roughly 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. And the reason why you want to add the cornstarch to the pie filling is to thicken it. No one wants to cut into a runny apple pie, so use cornstarch to thicken it up. Now, how much you use depends on how thick you want it. I didn't pour all 3 tablespoons at once. I did a little at a time to control the thickness of the pie filling. Now I'm adding the thickened pie filling back to the pot with the loose pie filling, and then I'm going to give it a good stir. If it's still too runny, I'm going to add the remaining cornstarch and stir it until I get it to my desired thickness. So here's the consistency of the pie filling thus far. It's not too runny and it's not too thick. Next, I'm going to take my sliced apples and add them to the mixture. Did y'all see how vibrant those apples looked? That's why it's important to squeeze that lemon juice to keep them from turning brown. Now, if you have kids who love to eat apples, you can follow the exact same process and make snack packs to keep in the fridge. I do this all of the time for my kids, and it's much cheaper than the ones you buy pre-packaged at the grocery store. So now what I'm about to do is blind bake the pie crust. Blind baking is when you bake a pie crust before filling it. It's usually done when a pie filling requires little to no cooking time. It's not really necessary with apple pies, and you can totally skip this process. I'm taking the parchment paper that came with the frozen pie crust and placing it back on it. Next, I'm going to take some beans to weigh it down, and the reason why I poked holes with the fork is because I didn't want the pie crust to bubble up while it was baking. I baked it at 375 degrees for about 10 minutes. You just want to lightly bake it until the edges are golden brown. Now, once the beans have cooled off, I'm going to place them back into the Ziploc bag and place them back in the pantry until I'm ready to use them again. So now I'm pouring the pie filling onto the pie crust, and I'm going to let it sit for about 20 minutes. The filling will continue to thicken while it's sitting. Now it's time to work on the top crust using the second pie crust that came in the package. As you can see, this pie crust is not wanting to cooperate. No matter how much I roll it out, it keeps crumbling up, even after adding more flour. And it's been sitting at room temperature for an hour, so I don't understand why this thing is falling apart as I try to roll it out. Looks like I'm gonna have to go with plan B. I'm going to make a homemade pie crust. Y'all, I have not done this in so many years. I may have been about 10 or 11 years old the last time I made a homemade pie crust. So you know I'm going to have to dig into the recesses of my brain to try to remember how it's done. My mom and grandma did not use any measurements at all, but as you can see, I'm measuring everything. They poured different things in until it turned into a ball of dough. I do remember them using flour, water, and Crisco. I have the butter flavored one, so that's what I'm using. And I've read somewhere that grating your butter and Crisco creates a flakier texture. So we are about to test this theory out. It also takes less time for it to combine with flour, which means you can create that ball of dough much quicker. So now I'm adding ice cold water to the flour mixture. This is where you have to be very careful because too much water will make your crust tough and too little water will result in a crumbly texture. So now I'm just going to knead this dough into a ball. So now I'm just going to wrap this in saran wrap and place this in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes. It's been about 30 minutes and now I'm going to roll the dough out so that I can place it on top of the apple pie. This is how the store-bought pie crust should have worked, but it was too flimsy, y'all. Look at how soft and fluffy my homemade dough is. So now I'm gently rolling the dough so that I can unroll it over the pie crust. The pie filling should be good and thickened by now because it sat for an extra 30 minutes while the dough chilled in the fridge. And now I'm just taking a knife and cutting off the overhang. And what I'm going to do with the overhang dough is place it in the freezer and save it for the next pie. Y'all, by this point in the cooking process, my husband and I were cutting up in the kitchen. Let me let y'all hear a sample of what was going on.
Alexa, play What Is Love by Hathaway in the family room.
What? What is that? How does Jordan know this song? Jordan, how do you know this song? Yeah, Jordan knows all of the songs from the 80s, 90s, and beyond. He definitely has an old soul. I tell him all of the time that he has been here before. But anyway, I'm brushing butter on top. Some people use egg wash, but I use butter. Both will create a flaky crust. And then I'm going to place the pie in the oven at 350 degrees for 1 hour. And this is how the pie should look after 1 hour. Let's start with dessert first. Whenever I'm cooking, I always have a plan of action where multitasking is involved. That is why I'm starting with dessert first. Now for this box cake recipe, I'm loosely following the instructions on the back of the cake mix box. To level up a box cake mix, I use 4 room temperature eggs and I replace oil with butter and then I double the amount required. For example, if the recipe calls for a half cup of oil, I'm going to do a whole cup of butter. I also substitute water for room temperature milk, and that, family, is how you create a very moist and delicious cake. Now, how I multitask is once I get the cake in the oven, I'll go ahead and prep my veggies, measure the seasonings, wash the meat, whatever I can do to move on to the next thing that I'm cooking, I'll do it while the cake is baking. For the glaze, I use powdered sugar, milk, and vanilla extract. If you want a thick glaze, pour less milk. If you want a thinner glaze, use more. I wanted mine to be a little on the thick side, and what I do is I pour a little bit of milk at a time into the powdered sugar and stir, repeating this process until I get my desired thickness. And now that I think about it, I probably should have done a cream cheese frosting versus this glaze. Next up is banana pudding. I'm loosely following my dad's banana pudding recipe. I'm adding vanilla extract to mine. I don't remember him adding that to his, so that's the main difference between our recipes. I'm using a can of sweet milk and adding water and giving it a good stir. I do have a recipe for this, so I will link that down in the description box if you are interested in making the banana pudding. There are so many different banana pudding recipes out there, y'all. I found this one to be my favorite because it is quick, simple, and easy to throw together. So now I'm going to put this in the fridge for 5 minutes. While it was sitting in the fridge, I went ahead and chopped my bananas. I forgot to mention that I had my carton of whipped cream thawing out in the fridge so that it would be easy to mix into the pudding. You know, I always wondered why you fold whipped cream into pudding instead of using a mixer, and I found out that it results in a lighter, fluffier texture, while mixing would deflate the whipped cream, making it more dense. Y'all, I remember my parents going back and forth about how to layer a banana pudding. My dad insisted that you had to put the pudding on the bottom and then layer from there, while my mom was on the side of layering first and then adding the pudding. It's going to get eaten either way, so to me, there's no right or wrong way to do it. I started with the pudding first, then the cookie, topped with a banana, and then another cookie. Once I covered the banana with the cookie, I added more pudding, and then I repeated the process until I got all the way to the rim of the bowl. Now, for decoration purposes, I usually crush the remaining cookies in the food processor and sprinkle them on top, but since I'm using a bowl with a lid, I didn't do it this time because I wanted to use all of the pudding up. So I forced the pudding all the way down to the bottom in order to make it all fit, but I still had a lot at the rim of the bowl. Once I put the lid on, pudding was going to get stuck on the top of it, so that's why I didn't add the cookies. They would have gotten stuck to the top of the lid, which is what ended up happening to the pudding anyway. First up is the red velvet cake, which is Jordan's favorite dessert. I always cook dessert first because let's be honest, if I save it until the end, it more than likely won't get cooked. Same when I'm cooking for holidays. I cook dessert first and then I focus on the main dishes. Whenever I cook from a cake mix box, I always use 4 room temperature eggs, 1 cup of milk, and I substitute oil for butter and then double that amount. Following that recipe will get you a cake that tastes homemade. So now I'm just going to shake the air bubbles out before placing it in the oven. Since I've learned how to make homemade frosting, I refuse to buy it in a jar, y'all. The homemade version is more soft and airy versus the solid, less whipped store-bought version. And plus, I save extra money by doing it myself. This one batch is enough for 2 cakes. So what I don't use today, I will put away for the next cake. And this is how the red velvet cake turned out. It was a dessert for the beer can chicken. Sweet potato pie, a true Sunday dinner staple. I washed my sweet potatoes and then boiled them until they were tender. By this point in the process, I was on the clock, y'all. I did not wait for them to cool off before I started mixing them. My husband was literally about to record his podcast as I was adding ingredients to the sweet potato pie. The kids and I and the dog tried to tiptoe around the house as he's recording, so I knew that I couldn't be making all of this noise with the blender, so I really rushed through making this pie. Now, if he was podcasting by himself, then he could have just pushed it off and recorded it at a different time, but he does have a partner where they podcast together, so I had to hurry up so that I wouldn't delay their recording time. And here are all of the ingredients that I'm going to be adding to this pie. I have 1 cup of melted butter, 2.5 cups of sugar, 1 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 tablespoon of self-rising flour, 1/4 cup of buttermilk, a teaspoon of vanilla, a teaspoon of lemon extract, and 4 eggs. Y'all, I have so many different sweet potato pie recipes, and I have yet to find that perfect one. This one comes close, but I have yet to find the one that my dad used to use. Now, he did write it down somewhere, and I have not found that written sweet potato pie recipe, but as soon as I find it, I'm going to make it. I do remember him using evaporated milk and some other ingredients. I can't even begin to tell you the measurements that he used. When I find that recipe, I'm going to hurry up and make that pie, just to bring back those memories of him cooking in the kitchen. Now, if you have a specific sweet potato pie recipe that you use, drop it down in the comment section so that I can give it a try. So y'all see that I put all of those eggs in that bowl together. You are not supposed to do that. You're supposed to blend one egg at a time. Since I was pressed for time, I had to throw all of them in there and mix them. He was literally about to press the record button as I dropped that last egg in there. But thankfully, I was able to mix everything up and get that pie in the oven before he started talking. And this is how the pie turned out, y'all. For the carrot cake, I'm starting with 4 room temperature eggs. I'm going to give them a head start in the mixer before I add 1 cup of room temperature milk. I'm also going to add 2/3 cup of butter instead of oil. This is the recipe that I follow when baking a boxed cake mix. Doing it this way not only saves time, but it takes your cake to a whole new level. Now I'm going to add a few boxes of raisins to the batter. I wanted to add pecans or walnuts, but 2 of my kids have nut allergies, so I left those out. Now, when I'm baking for huge family gatherings, I do add nuts and I label the cake saver so that my kids know not to eat it. They have so many options at these family gatherings, so missing out on one cake won't be the end of the world for them. Once I get all of the batter out of the bowl, I'm going to give it a good shake and a few taps to remove air bubbles. Doing this small gesture helps your cake bake evenly, resulting in a light and airy texture. I'm giving it the toothpick test to make sure that it cooked all the way through, and then I'm going to let it cool before adding frosting. I'm making my frosting homemade because it just tastes better. I'm starting with room temperature cream cheese. I just needed it to soften enough to mix with the other ingredients. Then I added 2 cups of powdered sugar, followed by a ½ cup of butter and a few drops of vanilla extract. Let's start with the honey bun cake. I always like to cook my desserts first because it doesn't take as long as everything else to cook. Plus, if I waited until after all of the main dishes were cooked, I would more than likely not have enough energy to pour into making dessert. So I just get it out of the way first. So far, I've added 4 room temperature eggs and a 3/4 cup of vegetable oil. Now, when I'm cooking cakes, I normally use unsalted butter equal to the amount of oil, but doubled, if that makes sense. Basically, you double the amount of butter if you are substituting the oil. So in this case, I would have used 1½ cups of butter instead of a 3/4 cup of oil. Since I'm getting low on butter, I went with the oil because my goal is to see how far I can go without having to go grocery shopping. This is how the cake batter should look after mixing everything together. I also added an 8-ounce container of sour cream in addition to the cake mix. Now I'm going to pour half of the cake batter into my greased bundt cake pan. This is the filling that's going in between the cake layers. I have a cup of brown sugar and a tablespoon of cinnamon. If you want, you can add chopped nuts to this, but since I have kids with nut allergies, I skipped the nuts. So you'll just sprinkle the brown sugar and cinnamon mixture all around the cake batter, making sure that you cover every inch. Now, when I make this cake, there's always a little bit of the brown sugar and cinnamon mixture left over, which is okay because my daughter makes this huge bag of kettle corn popcorn and she drizzles butter on it, and then she take the brown sugar and cinnamon mixture and sprinkle it onto the popcorn. Y'all, it is so good. I also use any leftover mixture to make snickerdoodles, so nothing in this house is wasted. We will find a way to repurpose it. So now I'm just adding the remaining cake batter to cover the brown sugar and cinnamon mixture. Once I get all of that covered, I'm going to give it a good shake, and then I'm going to take my spatula and smooth it out a little bit. The oven has already been preheated to 350 degrees, and I'm going to follow the instructions on the back of the cake mix box, and I'm going to bake the cake for 43 minutes. This is what the cake is looking like after 43 minutes. I'm going to give it the good old toothpick test. This will let me know if it needs to go back into the oven or if it's finished baking.
Like a moving tide.
You know, there's something sacred about gathering around food that tells a story and speaks to your soul. These recipes are passed down from generation to generation, and they are all created with love. And these soul food recipes aren't just about what's on the plate. It's about who's at the dinner table. I hope this video gave you more than just recipes. I really hope that it gave you a reason to slow down and savor the moment with your family. Let me know down in the comment section which one of these dishes had you ready to grab your fork and get to chewing. Because here in this kitchen, it is more than just food. It's about bringing families together and doing it all with love. I hope that you have a great day, and I will see you in the next video. Talk to you later. Bye.